And now you're back with all the things we brought, all these dreams and all this love. I'm still wearing this jacket, and it's got holes in the pockets. He was wearing it for years, and holes in the pockets. I'm still wearing this jacket. I'm still wearing this jacket. Every time it hurts, it breaks just like the right on the mountain. Every time it hurts, it breaks just like the right on the mountain. Every time it hurts, it breaks just like the right on the mountain. Right on the mountain. Oh, I can say it's funny how you owe me money. I'll never see you again. And I'll meet you at some party or some gathering. You'll meet tonight for my study. You'll be much prettier girl than. Although the summer nights are way to cry, sleepless and fun, I'll leave on the I'm still wearing your jacket. And now it's never much for doing things right. Maybe back from the late I'll watch you run at the gas station with nothing wild roads. It's been genetically modified, 'cause you're gone and it's still alive. Oh, I'm still wearing your jacket. I'm still wearing your jacket. There are things you give me that I'll never get back. They're flying wide in the dark. I'll always be wearing your jacket. And there's a probate report for June, but I'm already told I will fall asleep. I'll still be wearing your jacket. Every time it hurts, it breaks just like the first. Right on the mountain, every time it hurts, it breaks just like the first. Right on the mountain, every time it hurts, it breaks just like the first. Right on the mountain, every time it hurts, it breaks just like the first. Right on the mountain.
I'm rather disappointed my camera is playing up more than normal. We're moving on to number 5 rule number 5 of 12 rules for mad miracles a dozen recovery. How I defeated mental sickness and reclaimed my life. Based on the brilliant Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, but my own completely different 12 rules. It's like God doesn't want me to speak today. Really, it's not to be seen. Mm. So the next rule is turn negatives into positives. This is another big rule, really, because so much of what we experience pain from in the world, which destroys our vitality, is as when we're growing up, it often is something which is like self-imposed from the way we're interpreting reality rather than the reality itself. If you in different cultures, different the same thing can mean very different things. So um, in some cultures, if you don't make a lot of noise whilst you eat, that is considered an insult to the host. Whereas in our Western society, until recently, it was considered that it was rude to make much noise, to make noise while you eat. Um, so the host may in these two different cultures feel very differently about it. But it's not just something which is relative to cultures; it's something which is relative to individuals and how we individually interpret the phenomenon. So some people in our culture, will in our very same society, possibly partly because of how they've been raised, but still, owing to in some way to their something they have some power over themselves. It's some people, hear somebody criticizing their opinions or saying opinions which are very different to them, they will kind of in some way they will respond negatively. What exactly is going through their heads and their hearts at that point, I'm not exactly sure because I'm not really one of these people. But they may well kind of have a almost like a a knee-jerk reaction to have like bees, a swarm of bees rats, around their head, which is genuinely quite unpleasant for them, and also unpleasant for the person who is the target of their ire, their rage, for saying something that they didn't particularly like. Whereas if that person had a slightly different history and different kind of internal monologue going on with them, say for the past 6 months or the past 10 years or even the last week possibly of their life, they had paid attention to this issue, they could have a completely different interpretation on these vocalizations of the person they're talking to, or the person saying things which they don't like. And they could be like, actually, well, by me remaining, perfectly calm and, not insulted, not unhappy with you saying what you're saying, I'm actually, showing, I'm actually defending a very, very valuable value in, freedom of speech, without which societies have a tendency to, go turn into catastrophe. Because if people aren't allowed to communicate, then the whole intelligence of society tends to drop. If they're not allowed to be critical about what one another is thinking and what they're saying, openly critical. So on the one hand, the person could think, I'm defending something really good here, just by doing nothing, simply by not, you know, flying off the handle and berating somebody for saying something which seems strange to me. Um, so then they'd be like giving themselves a pat on the back, and they'd be feeling good about themselves simply because they're doing nothing, which just doing nothing in that case already in a way raises oneself up above, like, I don't know, 70% of the population who just aren't intelligent or moral enough to see the value in defending free speech. So in that case, instead of thinking of it in terms of, oh, this is person saying something which is threatening to what I believe, and it's potentially immoral, and you know um, it's an insult to me because I think something different. Instead of thinking like that, they're interpreting in a wholly different way, whereby it becomes, in some ways a positive. It's like, um, if like a church ceiling needs painting, the great artist does not necessarily feel that it's a bad thing and it's a terrible thing that he's got to go and paint the ceiling and in a way correct the ceiling and make it more beautiful. He doesn't think that's a terrible thing. And of course, lamentation. Um, it gives him a chance, an opportunity to demonstrate his virtue. In just the same way, in a society where most people are simply not, reasonable enough to value freedom of speech, hearing somebody who is a bit wild in their opinions, or you know, potentially has some somewhat insulting views to people. Well, that's giving one an opportunity to distinguish oneself from all the people who are just, so narcissistically concerned with seeing a reflection of their own opinions in the outer world with no tolerance for diversity of opinion, and confidence in just polite and kind therapeutic talking interventions. So, depending on how they interpret it is going to make, the whole difference. There's nothing, there's actually nothing, there's nothing in any opinion which makes it hurtful to somebody else. That kind of phenomenon doesn't exist. It's always the dynamic between the two individuals and depends upon the person who's listening just as much as the person who's speaking. And I mean, on this subject, it's important to kind of, because it's such an important subject, it's all right to basically continue to go down this diversion for a little bit more, because um, yeah, because what I'm going to say is that it's not possible, really to predict what people find offensive. Because you could always find somebody who finds something offensive. Uh, I mean, I would take offense to things because I'm not saying that free speech is like my 100% highest value, which there can be no other considerations involved, which might trump it at some point. Um, I mean, I would believe in free speech, but the thing is, we're running this issue. I mean, because there's such a tendency for politically correct people to take offense to the opinions of just certain people who they don't like. It's important to point out that a lot of the people that they don't like, or people like me, or other people, are very offended, or they really don't like a lot of the things that that other people are saying, that these politically correct people are saying. We're equally offended, by that. We're just too polite and decent to try to use the strong arm of the law to shut you up over it and send you to prison, unless you start doing that to us, and then we may be forced to retaliate just to try and knock some sense into you. Um, I guess that's how it goes. I mean, people who believe in free speech don't necessarily, not believe in tit for tat. They don't. They're not necessarily like, we lay down our arms and you can just stamp on us and do whatever you like to us. You know, if you're going to violate us for saying things you don't like, be careful, because that might get turned around on you at some point in the future. So this is only a short section, and I'll just read it out, and then maybe continue my little diatribe, and we'll see what else I have to add in the next half an hour of the video. Because I've obviously gone a bit off topic on there, but I don't think it does too much harm. I hope people still get my point. About the huge importance of interpretation, whether something is experienced negatively or positively. In the ordinary course of events, bad and happy events are always entwined with good, happy events. The butterfly effect, whereby even very small, seemingly inconsequential events totally change the course of big ones as well. I.e., a butterfly flapping its wings in one place can be the cause of a hurricane 1,000 miles away. This effectively means that none of the good events that occur in life wouldn't occur if it were not for the unpleasant ones. Although admittedly, other good events could indeed occur. For instance, one may suffer the untimely death of a close relative, and then, as a result of the way that takes one out of one's usual everyday train of thoughts, putting one in a more emotionally sensitive and sad mood, and taking one out of one's usual schedule, then happen to encounter a girl who resonates with one's depression in a dreary coffee house, who turns out to be a great love of one's life. Or one might go completely awry from one's course in life by taking the wrong course at university, and still happen to meet such a girl a few years later, so that it becomes difficult to resent one's wrong path due to the overwhelming positive feelings one has for her. Unless a total calamity occurs, like sustaining a serious head injury that renders one semi-idiot, the universe tends to have a way of balancing itself out and redeeming itself over time if one is only receptive to its gifts. By paying attention to this central fact of our existence, drinking it in and contemplating it in a leisurely and tranquil fashion over the course of the natural passage of time, we can come to a state whereby we are able to embrace the entire universe in its eternal marriage of necessary events, of joy and sorrow, in its in the ecstatic attitude that Nietzsche called Amor Fati, a far deeper and profound joy than any mere transitory event can ever by itself provide. Though it will probably not be particularly popular to say this, it may also be very helpful to pay attention to this way of thinking in the moral sphere, in order to combat excessive indignation, which is one of the chief causes of unhappiness and objection to life. One thinks about it carefully, the force with which people cry out against the misery of the world can at times be a bit hypocritical, since unless the world had problems, i.e., unhappiness of some sort, there would be little left to accomplish. That is one of the central conundrums that the most much maligned postmodern movement sought to come to grips with, and it shouldn't be scorned. The absence of anything to achieve, could easily be seen as a tragedy, as great as any in human history, which might strike the heart of mankind, which for thousands of years has been accustomed to the conquest of nature in the name of the betterment of mankind. That this could strike mankind as a cause for unmitigated nihilism, because it ceases to have a goal to achieve. Unless there was hardship, kindness itself would lose its premium. Without understanding this central fact, one understands very little or nothing about the world today. These problems themselves are largely the product of this excess and surfeit of beneficent resources, which goes against our very nature. As sagely whispers its counsel, poverty is the mother of resource. Turn negatives into positives. So yeah, let's just hammer home that point, and probably quite unpopular point about the world today, because you see, it's not from want of resources that the people are unhappy. That is that simple way of phrasing it is, generally quite a commonplace in our culture. Or at least it was in my growing up. Uh, um, but it can be, important to even, to push it even further than that, and say it's not the material abundance. It's not no, so it's not a material lack which is making us unhappy, but it's actually the opposite. It's actually the material abundance and saturation that is making us unhappy, because in reality, when people's needs are met and their survival needs are met, and they no longer have to strive to survive and struggle to survive, that completely confuses them and bewilders them. It can make them, very nihilistic and makes them no longer see a point. So, conquest over adversity is very, 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 very deeply woven into our DNA as a species and as individuals. So the idea of having a strict dichotomy between positives and negatives really is a very absurd idea from of our own nature. Maybe there can be real negatives which are difficult to see anything good from, like I said, brain injury. But most of the things that occur can be seen, as Stephen Molyneux talks about, I think, as an opportunity for virtue, you know. um, so, say we're young and our parents argue, and that just drives us crazy, and it really upsets us at the time. You know, Unfortunately, we don't always do this. But if somebody's listening to this now and they're quite young, maybe they could actually think whether I could respond differently to that, and instead of laying blame on one's parents, uh, in a way that kind of turns attention away from oneself and one's own responsibility for how one responds and still deals with it. Um, I mean, say one has unruly parents, you know who are not the best behaved parents, um, because one is the younger party, the supposedly inferior party. Does that mean that one has to adopt that role and get annoyed and feel bad for oneself that one has these incompetent parents? Or could one see it as like a great opportunity whereby you can actually stand out as more mature than your own parents, and other people down the line will recognize that, and I'll say, wow, you're such a kind of like stable and mature guy, and yet look at your parents. I mean, how did you turn out like this? How did you turn out so so sensible and reasonable? Although we often don't recognize it when we're young, or at the time, in the course of life, as it unfolds, in quite a long duration, we can often find that we do receive credit for the virtue that we may show if we show it, show it at an earlier age, or the endurance that we show, or the the maturity that we show. Um, we will receive credit for it down the line. So looking at it that way, it's kind of everything can kind of become inverted. You kind of want the harshest environment. You can darn well cope with and put up with, because if you have an easy environment, well, you got nothing. You've proven nothing. You haven't done yourself any credit, because you never had any opportunity to do so anyway. Uh, so, looking at it from that perspective, it could be seen that those with the worst parents are the luckiest. I mean, as long as they don't outright, beat their brains out, beat their children's brains out. I mean, it's. I mean, we can't just totally invert it. I mean, but what I'm saying is that this is a very real advantage that I'm talking about. Not just to do with parents, but in life generally. If you have certain crosses to bear and hardships, that's when you have the opportunity to show your to demonstrate your credit, to demonstrate credit. So what you actually want is perhaps some combination of the two. I mean, you obviously don't want to be drowned as a puppy, or have that harsh an environment that you're not even going to survive it. And also, you want the right education, such that you can, become intelligent enough to deal well properly with your environment and overcome the challenges. So you need a lot of positive input. Um, but like I say, you can always turn it around and view it the other way, as long as it isn't too punishing. I mean, if you're just, if you unfortunate enough to, get involved in a car accident and you sustain a brain injury, it's difficult to turn that into a positive. But there are lots of things which you can turn into a positive. Like, another example would be being alone. Um, you know, some people hate being alone, and they see solitary confinement as like a terrible form of torture. Whereas and it is kind of sometimes difficult to be alone. It makes you come face to face with yourself. You know, and people don't necessarily want that. They prefer to kind of be lost. In rubbing up against their fellows. Getting comfort and validation constantly from others. Um, but being alone can be a great opportunity for reflection and for personal development and sort of growth, inwardness, and deepening of one's kind of response to the universe. Um, so if one is like kind of like rendered forcibly alone, um, it may be possible to make some very good things out of that. Um, so in one of the previous videos, I talked about learning to accept pleasure and not see pleasure as something, or enjoyment as something which is shameful, or and that is in many ways the most essential thing. It is our natural impulse and validation as human beings. But then on the other side of that, it can be also that um, a a kind of openness and acceptability to certain kinds of pain, or an embrace for certain kinds of pain, and not rebelling against certain types of pain, that can also be a potentially positive thing. Because pain can be can be an accompany can accompany growth. A growth can be accompanied by pain. Um, and just, I suppose, a big issue is just that the truth hurts, as they say. Um, the to actually deepen one's psychology and become more in tune with reality and the truth, to understand things better about oneself and the world, may require some heightened sensitivity, which involves some kind of pain. Um, to be willing to entertain things which put oneself in a compromising position in some ways, which make one more isolated from others, in not just like going along with the general insanity. um, and just to explain it in other terms, I mean, what is life? and what is, the living organism? Well, they are basically, a very, very, very complex mechanism which has been built by highly by very high pressure selection for survival over billions of years, and that has involved a constant struggle um, and conquest over adversity. Um, to constantly outcompete one's rivals, and to find nutrition and avoid predators. um this is kind of a constant battle for our ancestors, and that has produced say the beautiful lion of the savannah. Without that intensive Darwinian forging mechanism, there would be no lion. There would just be rocks. There'd just be soil. There'd be dirt. It's the creation of beautiful life forms goes hand in hand with a constant battle for conquest over adversity to make them stronger and stronger and stronger and more perfect in what they do, in accomplishing something in the world, accomplishing power over objects in the world, their prey, their nutrition. um, and that is in many ways analogous to the human soul and the way in which the soul develops virtues, as they're called, which are beautiful kind of traits which give pleasure to itself and potentially to others. These only really arise and come about through struggles in the past to some extent. And I would say that it's important to have moderation and to be lucky that one gets the right amount of adversity, or one should try to arrange it that one gets the right proportion of adversity. So if you get too big adversities, you're dead. But if you don't get any adversities, well, that might be a negative thing. Uh, um, I think Nietzsche said that the key to happiness. I mean, he says other things about the key to happiness, but one of them is like, do what's most difficult for you. Um, because you want basically a goal that you aim for, an aim in life, which actually is perhaps exactly equal to your inner strength and your inner power. If if the goal is too easy for you and your strength is greater, then that is not going to give you the opportunity to really enjoy exercising your strength and your skills as much as you could do, because that is the thing that human beings really enjoy. It's simply doing what they're good at and being allowed to exercise their will on something, against something. um, Such that it yields, but it doesn't yield easily, such that one has energy left over and wonders, what one's going to do with it, what one's going to do now. If one has a romantic encounter with somebody, I mean, it's maybe best to pursue it to exhaustion. I mean, that was probably the ideal. Um, rather than feeling that what one was wasted here. This one didn't get the chance to fully manifest. it's it's often only in actually encountering certain challenges that one becomes aware of one's own strength and one's own virtue. So one requires the challenges to become aware of one's own strength and virtue, which one is obviously something that one tends to enjoy. Uh, so you should think about all these things when you hear somebody complaining about some kind of trivial issue, or if you find yourself complaining about something, or complaining internally, and just consider how much of your own misery and happiness is caused by your own pathetic complaining attitudes, which at some level you feel is totally unworthy of yourself, and that actually causes you to be unhappy, because it causes you to hate yourself and feel contempt for yourself, because you're portraying yourself as a total weakling who gets defeated by some minor thing, like your your family member leaving a mess of the kitchen sink, or the kitchen worktop, or something like that. That causes you to become perturbed, and lose your you lose your cool into whine, um, in a way that makes you appear to both yourself and others to be so much less than the beautiful hero or heroine that you really are. And the really great drama which we are all caught up as human beings of life and death, and the often very immense suffering of other human beings, an opportunity to you know to lessen their suffering or redeem it in some way. um Instead we get very hung up on some negative things just because it's the done thing in our society. We see everybody else as such pathetic whiners and complainers that we just automatically, habitually adopt the same attitude as we're growing up. And we don't consider how stupid and insane it really is. And, it's this attitude which we've picked up from our environment that is limiting us rather than anything real in our environment or in reality. When we could really be the heroes which we're kind of poring over and reading about in the books that we read and the films that we watch, instead of externalizing our glory and our praise on these fictional characters, we could be actually manifesting them in our own lives. Instead, we whine about burnt toast, or our our brother or our sister, the way they're behaving, and that they're just a whiner, they're complaining all the time, or they're not, they're not dignified enough. They get drunk too much or something like that. So instead of seeing all these things of negatives and objections, we could see them as like a backdrop for our own heroism, which simply makes our own heroism that much greater by contrast. And and we could learn to actually be genuinely very, 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 very grateful that there are these fairly simple people around us who still give us a chance to shine. Because if everybody was an absolute hero, you know, would it be so much fun? If everybody was a James Bond, James Bond wouldn't get all the girls, would he? Or Jane Bond, as now she wouldn't get all the boys.